I want to share how I set up my Sony A7C II for travels, and this is for photo and video. We're going to start with the default settings, and I'm not really tinkering a lot of the settings. Most of the picture profiles and everything else are in default, but there's some crucial steps that I want to show you guys to make this travel ready so that you're not fidgeting a lot while you're traveling, just capturing moments, whether it's video or photo. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start off with the top knob right here. We're just going to place it on video mode because that's what we're going to start with. And then on the mode, it doesn't really matter right now. I'm going to explain why I choose shutter priority mode. And then let's flip the camera and let's go to settings. All right, so now we have my menu settings. This is where you would put a lot of your shortcuts. But to me, again, I don't usually tinker with this because I have a pretty straightforward setup. So we're going to go all the way to setup, and we're going to go to number 3, operation customize. And then from here, the very first thing that we're going to change is the different set for still and movie. That means that 2 different settings for both. So we're just going to hit OK. And I have everything selected from aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Everything has to be independent, but focus mode. For me, focus mode, just I want it to be shared by whatever I'm filming, especially because sometimes I prefer center focus or zone or sometimes wide, depending on the scenery that I'm going for. So far everything is checked, but your focus mode. Now for the function menu settings, I don't really change a lot of this. Usually I just go through the focus area and the multimetering or the metering mode, and then the white balance and the exposure comp. These are the 4 things that I worry about. Oh, and also the active stabilization. Sometimes I don't want it, sometimes I do, especially if I'm on a tripod, I'm going to turn that off. But so far I think this is all default, but feel free to copy it just in case you want to copy my function menu settings. And then we'll go to Finder and monitor settings. And on here, I put the monitor brightness on sunny weather so that it's the highest brightness setting. And then we are going to go to the auto power off temperature, and we're going to go to high just in case you're filming a really long recording, especially in video. This is going to allow your camera to operate in higher heat temperatures. And there's one more thing. On the shooting menu on number 10, go to emphasize recording display, and we're going to have it on. So that means if we're recording, there's going to be a red square on your monitor so that you know that you're recording, you're not missing it. And if you don't have it, you're just going to see the standby green. And then if you hit that, it's going to say red record. It gives you kind of like a tally light so that you know that you're recording, you're not missing recording. We're going to move on to the settings of the camera. Now we're going to move to the top knob, and we're going to switch shutter priority mode, meaning that we get to select the shutter speed of the camera while the other settings are auto. Well, the aperture will be auto. And this is great because we want the motion blur to be 1/50th if you're shooting 24 frames per second, or 1/125th of a second if it's 60 frames per second. It's usually just double the frame rate so that your shutter angle is at 180 degrees. This gives you this natural looking motion blur. And again, the reason why we have this so that we're not tinkering with the camera a lot when we're traveling, we simply just point and shoot, and we try to really get the exposure right. So now we're going to go to page number 1, which is the main menu, and we're going to go to number 2, and we're going to select log shooting mode. And with the A7Cii II, it's only flexible ISO because it doesn't have any Cine EI like the FX3 or the FX30. Okay, we go back to 1, and with your select LUT, we are going to pick 709 at 800%. I like this a lot because it really gives me a look of the Sony LUT that I use, especially for post-production. So I can kind of see what the final look would be like. Now for recording frame rate, this is 24 frames per second. I always choose 24 frames per second unless I specifically want 60 frames per second or 120 frames on 1080p. If I do want slow-mo shots, but I keep it at 24 just to make everything look natural and that I get more exposure. I can have more light in because I can put it to 1/50th of a shutter. Now for the ISO, if I do need more light in, especially in low light, I can switch this to 3200 because that is the second base ISO of the Sony A7C II. And if not, I just do 800 for everything. The reason why we pick the base ISOs, 800 or 3200, is to get the best dynamic range of the sensor. But it doesn't mean it's going to magically give you the best looking image. You still have to expose properly with the different settings. From there on, your aperture will be automatic and the camera will decide for you. And this is where we go to exposure compensation. I usually do +1 just to give me a little bit more flexibility in post so that it's not overexposed or it's not underexposed. Nothing is clipping at +1, and usually the camera does a really good job on getting my exposure right. So this is how I do it. So that's that. My white balance, I'm going to keep it at 5600. If I do know I'm going into a different temperature, especially for indoor lighting, usually it's 3200 Kelvin, I would switch this to 3200 Kelvin. If you do want to place it on auto white balance, you can, but you're going to end up spending a lot of time in post fixing it or color correcting it. For me, I just pick the closest what I think the light is and just go from there so that I'm not really tinkering in post, and that kind of like most of my footage are similar in terms of the white balance, so that in post I can just easily match them up. If I do need to color correct, then I will. But so far I just eyeball the right temperature so that it's consistent throughout my shots. Now for file format, I usually choose the HS4K. One reason because H.265 is a lot more compressed, and I highly recommend this if you are editing on Mac so that your files are smaller but the quality is still there. You don't want to shoot HS, shoot S or SI, because SI is going to give you better quality, but it's uncompressed. It's just going to give you bigger file sizes. And the S is similar to HS, but it's H.264. It's a little easier in the computer, especially if you don't have a Mac. But then again, it's compressed, so you're going to lose a little bit of quality in there. But for me, I choose HS because one, I'm just delivering on social media. If I'm doing production work, I would do SI. But so far, HS has been like pretty good, even for social media campaigns. If a client pays me to do a social media campaign, HS is good enough anyways, and that I can still get really good quality out of it. Okay, record settings, always choose the highest setting, and I don't mind shooting the highest setting. Again, these file sizes are small enough for me to store on my hard drives, and it won't take a lot of space. Mind you though, for memory cards, I would do V90 SD cards because it's going to allow you to shoot the highest bitrate, especially on 4K 120 for applicable cameras. This one is only 4K 60, so we can get by with V60s. But for me, I have V90 cards, so I just use that with the Sony A7C II. The rest, I don't usually tinker. The audio, I just leave it at 20. I usually have a Rode Wireless Pro on this one if I'm recording audio, and then I just record the file from there. For focus mode, I just do AFC. It's continuous so that it's always trying to find the focus depending on the focus area. For me, I usually do center fix or zone so that it gives me a little bit more control. But if you want to focus on the closest subject to the lens, you pick wide. And then here's subject recognition in AF. I usually put it on, especially if I'm blogging. Then I would pick human, and then you have different stuff here. But usually if it's an object or if it's just run and gun, I would turn it off so that it's not getting the people walking by, and it's getting, for example, center fix, center focus. It's getting the focus whatever I'm pointing the camera at. Now, if I want to switch to photo, all I want to do is click this, and I'm going to change my mode into aperture priority mode. This means that the camera will pick the shutter for me while I get to pick the aperture. And sometimes I put auto ISO, but I usually leave it at 100, or sometimes I would bring it up just in case. For the picture profile, we're going to turn it off on photo because it's raw and I just want to see the standard look. And then for the settings file format, I just choose RAW. And then compressed RAW is fine, especially if you're delivering on social media. You don't want uncompressed RAW because it's going to give you a big file size. And then JPEG quality, I just do fine because I'm okay with that. Focus mode, I put autofocus single shot mode. And then focus area, it just depends on what I'm taking a photo of. Usually center fix is good for me, or zone, depending on what I want to take a photo of. And then for the exposure comp, I usually just do 0 because it's a raw file. I usually just get middle gray or like the perfect exposure. I don't need to expose to the right like the +1 on the slog3 in video mode. And then since we have 2 different settings for photo and video, every single time we switch to video, it's going to switch back to slog3 with the LUT on, and we're now back to just filming video in slog. And I'm ready to record right away, and I'm just like framing my shot, and that's it. I don't need to worry about any setting. The camera will do it for me, and I'll get amazing exposure. I would say it works 9 times out of 10. If not, you go on manual mode and you really dial in your exposure. And then vice versa for photo mode. Once I flick that into photo mode, I am now ready to shoot in RAW with standard picture profile. And that's it. If you have any questions with my travel settings, feel free to comment down below or message me on Instagram, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.